think Mr. Leggett said that I think the issue goes way beyond what Mr. Trump is saying, and where does those feelings that he's expressing, the discord, the racial discord that's happening in this country, where does that come from, and what do we do to solve it? Because I see it playing out on the high school, on the playground in our high schools. The Latino kids are beating up the Muslim kids are beating up the Chinese kids. I mean, our kids don't even respect each other. So how are we going to teach racial and cultural and ethnic diversity and respect to our kids, so that as they grow up, they see a world that they believe in the respect and the compassion for others, and respect for others.
Well, I welcome the thoughts of our other colleagues here, but I think you hit the fundamental issue, which is it goes to what the overall ethic in a community is, and whether we are raising our children and families in a way that respects and celebrates those differences and recognizes that what has made this country great over time, with all the struggles we've seen to try to build a more perfect union, and we're a long way from getting where we want, but we have been making progress. And what this indicates, this whole conversation that Trump has sort of ignited, but also all the other issues that you raised, is how much farther we have to go, and how much we need to make sure, as we teach our children, and have them grow up in a community like here, where I do believe we have done a lot better job in this community than in so many places around the country, under the leadership of County Executive Leggett and others, where when he came into office, his whole philosophy was, if there's not enough room around the table, we're going to expand the size of the table and bring more people in. It's not a zero-sum game. Everybody should participate, and we're going to make room for the conversation so that every voice from every perspective is heard. And that's what's required, and it does require us that we do that in our schools and every facet of our lives. I do think that the President of the United States has worked really hard to try to bring this country together, and this strain of sort of negativity and division has obviously been with us for a long time, but I think it surfaced even more after the election of President Obama. The Tea Party has many different heads, but one of the heads clearly is this sort of ugly seam in American politics, and we're just going to have to defeat it in every way possible. But the best way is for people of goodwill, people of all different faiths, to come together and show that we are bigger than that as a community. And I think that kind of dialogue is important. And again, standing up, always standing up and speaking out when we see that kind of bigotry and division is important, because as you know, if you allow that kind of bigotry to stand and are silent in the face of bigotry, it only grows and becomes more poisonous. So I think all of us would welcome ideas of how to do that, but I think interfaith efforts in our community are another important part of doing that. And in this community, we have seen leaders and different faith leaders try to bring the community together. I remember very clearly after 9/11, where there was another effort to try to portray Islam as some kind of violent extreme religion. There was a real effort in this community to say no, that the perpetrators of that violence were people who were trying to hijack a great religion for their own extremist political purposes. And in this community anyway, we were able to bring people together. And we just need to, I think the lesson here is that we can never be complacent, we can never be satisfied. It's a work in constant progress. And I do think over time we've made progress in this country, but we just need to keep working even harder.
We've made a lot of progress in the Montgomery County Public Schools.
And we haven't, I do think that this, as George says, in the public schools here, I think that we do have an ethic in this community that where we see that kind of, any kind of outbreak or evidence of that kind of thing, that we work very hard to address it. But, unfortunately, the United States, more broadly is not as diverse and has not adapted and understood the strength of that diversity in all its fullness. So I think.
Just to add one thing, Chris.
Yeah, Jamie Rassing.
So, thank you, so much for raising that point. I don't know if you saw the report that was released last week by the Southern Poverty Law Center about bullying on campuses and in schools, beginning in elementary schools, that has taken a sharp rise just over the last couple of months with the Trump rhetoric, where Trump himself is often invoked by the students in bullying other kids or beating up other kids. There was one incident in Boston where I think it was a 17 and a 19-year-old boys beat up a homeless man and said, "Trump is right, send these Mexicans back to Mexico."
We have a similar poll here with over 300 plus Montgomery County public school kids. 25% of Muslim kids report being bullied or harassed or intimidated. 10% of it is happening from a school official.
Yeah, and I think some of the kids who visited me in Annapolis told me stories of, their classmates calling them terrorists on the playground and stuff like that. When you raise the question, well, where is it coming from? Obviously, the revival is being fueled by the license given to the expression of the most primitive, barbaric feelings by Trump, and then the capitulation of most of the people in the Republican Party to it. They get behind him, where one day they say, "Oh, that was racist," the next day they say, "But we need party unity. We've got to get behind this." What kind of mixed message is that? To say, well, that was unacceptable, that was racist, but we've got to win in November. I mean, that's a scary thing. So, I think generally we need to be doing a much better job of civic education in our public schools. Some of you know I've written a book for students in public schools called We the Students, which is about all the Supreme Court cases that affect kids in public school, including the cases dealing with bullying and Title IX and desegregation and affirmative action and so on. And the antidote to this is going to be some sense of historical perspective and constitutional perspective. Because look, America is not one race, one religion, one language, one ethnicity, one political ideology, but we do have one constitution that unifies everybody. And we've got to rally around constitutional values of equal protection, freedom of expression, diversity, freedom of speech, and so on. That's what we've got to do. And we've got to teach it to the kids. But I would say that the South historically has been the problem and continues to be the main problem. In terms of, as George says, Montgomery County has an aggressive program for teaching about diversity and tolerance in schools and dealing with problems when they arise the best we can. And I can guarantee you that doesn't happen in lots of parts of the country, and especially in the southern states where things have grown incredibly racially polarized. Again, in the schools, I don't know if you saw the New York Times article yesterday about what's going on in the schools in the South, and in politics, and in economics, and so on. From the deep South states today, in the U.S. House of Representatives, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's one white Democrat from Tennessee. Everyone else is an African-American Democrat or a white Republican. And so, the gerrymandering that's taking place in the South is to pack as many Democrats, as many African Americans into as few districts as possible, and make the Democratic Party the black party, and the Republican Party the white party, and that's been working. So that's an explicitly racial program that we have to deal with in the states that had seceded from the Union, where we had a civil war, and we had the second Reconstruction of the Civil Rights Movement, but we're having to go back to those kinds of politics, which nobody knows better than Ike Leggett because he grew up, in Louisiana. So what can we do in Maryland? Well, we were a slave state ourselves, but we have been in the forefront of progressive change, and we've got to stay in the forefront of it, and stay in the forefront of dealing with the kids, because they feel this very intensely, what's going on. They really do. When you talk to kids, they know exactly what's happening, and they pierce through all the propaganda. And that Southern Poverty Law Center report is scary. You have kids saying stuff like, U.S. citizen kids of Latino descent who say, are we going to be deported from the country if Trump becomes president? And lots of Muslim kids expressing real fear about what's going to happen to their families if Trump becomes president. So I'm glad you raised that.